Senator Rob Black, and I'm Chair of the Agriculture and Forestry Committee in the Senate of Canada. I'm joined today by my colleague Senator Paula Simons, Deputy Chair of the Committee, and Senatrice Chantal Petitclerc, a member of our committee, and also Alan Kruszel, a no-till crop farmer based in Stormont County, not far from here. He's also a longtime board member of the Soil Conservation Council of Canada and a passionate soils health advocate. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today, either here in Ottawa or from elsewhere across the country. Most of us go through our daily lives without thinking about the earth beneath our feet. But soil is essential to how we live. It's critical to life. Soil puts food on our tables, it purifies our air and water, and it plays a key role in mitigating climate change. Soil is also a foundation of our economy. It fuels millions of jobs in agriculture and forestry and generates more than $30 billion of our country's annual GDP. Canada is the fifth largest agricultural producer in the world. Our healthy soil is at the root of this success. But Canada's soil has been degrading for decades. Over the last 2 years, our committee dug deep into this vital national resource to uncover the reasons why and to cultivate solutions. We heard from more than 150 farmers, producers, ranchers, researchers, scientists, and policymakers. We visited farms, research centers, and academic institutions across the country. We were inspired by the incredible work that has been done and is being done to preserve soil health. We met with agricultural producers who have been cultivating healthy soil for decades. And we learned about the technological advancements that are enhancing soil health. But we also learned that Canada's soil is facing unprecedented challenges. Climate change, extreme weather events, pollution, and urbanization are degrading soil conditions in every region of this country. This threatens our food security, the environment, and millions of livelihoods. And this is not just a problem particular to our country. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that more than 30% of the world's soils are already degraded. And by 2050, as much as 90% of the world's could be degraded. It's hard to picture a world with hardly any healthy soil to grow our food and purify our air and water. But it might be the reality facing future generations. Like the title of the report suggests, we are standing on critical ground. This title implies that soil is essential, and it underscores the urgent need to protect it. That's why we are making 25 recommendations to stop erosion and start building healthy soil across this country. Our first recommendation is for the federal government to designate soil as a strategic national resource. This must be bolstered by a long-term strategy to protect and conserve soil across Canada, a strategy with concrete targets, timelines, and provisions that are regularly reviewed. We are also calling for the appointment of a national soils advocate to help give this issue the attention that it deserves. Another glaring problem is the lack of availability of data in soil health. Soil looks different in every region of Canada, and the provinces and territories and Indigenous communities can each have different ways of gathering information on soil health. This makes it difficult to analyze and compare soil conditions across Canada. We are calling on the federal government to take the lead in creating a National Soils Institute and a national database. This will help us to better understand the state of our soils across this great country and find strategies to fix soil degradation and improve soil health. Senator Simons and Senatrice Petitclerc will describe a few of the other recommendations in the report, but I want to highlight one last point. This year marks the 40th anniversary since the Senate last released its report on Canadian soil. I have a copy of that 1984 report here. It's called Soil at Risk, Eroding Canada's Future. This was the first report of its kind, and it's still in high demand today. Since then, soil health management has greatly improved, and crop yields have increased, yet our soil is still degrading. We do not, and I repeat, we do not have another 40 years to protect and conserve our soil. We must act now to preserve this valuable natural resource so that we can continue to feed Canada and the world now and for future generations. Before I hand it over to Senator Simons, I would like to acknowledge all the committee members and senators who helped with this report, many of whom are here today to celebrate this great achievement. And I also want to thank the committee staff and our office staff who have put much time and effort into this report. I also want to give special recognition to our colleague, Senator Victor O., who is officially retiring from the Senate of Canada on Monday. He has been a member of this committee for over a decade. Thank you, Victor, for your many years of service to this committee. Our committee also owes a huge thank you to the many farmers, producers, ranchers, and soil health experts from across this country who welcomed us to their farms and research facilities or met with our committee virtually or here in Ottawa. We heard from experts across Canada, and we were encouraged to undertake this study by many. This report would not exist without your dedication and invaluable expertise on soil health. It's now my pleasure to invite and introduce Senator Simons to say a few words. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Senator Black, not just for those opening words today, but for all your remarkable leadership as we embarked on this study. I have to say that not all of us were as initially enthused about soil health as Senator Black, but as our colleague Senator Brent Cotter said, we came to doubt and stayed to pray. And I want to start in that context by acknowledging that we speak to you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin people, and that I am a visitor here from Treaty 6 territory. Because I think when we do land acknowledgements, we need to acknowledge the land on which this country is built. Through the course of our study, we learned that many Canadian farmers and ranchers are already early adopters of regenerative agricultural practices that protect the soil. Those include things like no-till and low-till cultivation on the prairies, cover cropping and winter cropping in central Canada, intercropping, growing two crops together so that they help each other, eliminating monocropping so that you're not just growing one thing that depletes the soil, reintroducing livestock who produce what I might politely call natural fertilizer, rotational grazing, where the cattle eat down the grassland thoroughly and don't just nibble like a buffet, so that the grass has another cycle of carbon sequestration, and the practice of turning marginal cropland back to forage or grazing when it turns out that cropping there isn't the right strategy for soil health. These regenerative agriculture practices can also mitigate climate change and help Canada reach its net zero emission targets on time. Now, soil health looks different in every region of the country, and we discussed in our report everything from permafrost melt in the north to how you farm on the rock in Newfoundland and Labrador, to looking at the drylands of the prairie grasslands. And because these soil conditions are different, the committee learned thoroughly, and we heard from many experts, that a one-size-fits-all approach to soil health management does not work. But we also heard that we need ways to encourage and incentivize agriculture producers to invest in better soil management practices. And one tool that our report discusses is to create or encourage the creation of robust and regulated carbon markets so that farmers that raise the soil organic carbon on their land are able to benefit from those measurable results and find a way to monetize and trade those carbon offsets based on measurable improvements so that the credits are real and not hypothetical or aspirational. Now, carbon markets fall under provincial jurisdiction, so Ottawa can't just set one up, but federal policies can help to prepare the groundwork. For example, if we had better soil mapping and data sharing, we would be able to know that carbon markets are actually real and not hypothetical. We also need to find ways to reward people who have already done the hard pioneering work of experimenting with regenerative agriculture so that we don't just have ways to incentivize new adopters, that we also reward the early adopters for the risk-taking and the entrepreneurship that they embarked on in pioneering soil health techniques. The other thing we learned in our study that was, I think, a shock to many of us is the extent of soil pollution in Canadian grasslands and farms. I'm from Alberta, so I was well aware of the challenges that are created by hydrocarbon pollution created by oil and gas production. But we also learned that pesticides can leave residues that exist in the soil for years and decades, and perhaps an even greater problem of heavy metal poisoning, lead, cadmium, and in the Arctic mercury. I think we were, many of us, shocked to learn that the lead poisoning in our soil is still there from the days when we put lead in our paint and gasoline, and that lead does not degrade. And so we need to come up with ways to measure that soil pollution and find ways to mitigate it. We also learned about emerging challenges with microplastics, antibiotics, and pharmaceuticals in our soil and then in our water. Witnesses told us again and again that there's a lack of awareness and a lack of data on where contaminated sites are located, and that overall there is no data nor uniform definition of contaminated soils. Therefore, our report recommends that the federal government work with the provinces, territories, and Indigenous governments to conduct more research on soil pollution and its impacts on human health, and that the federal government develop a national strategy for remediating contaminated soils. Maintenant, j'aimerais inviter ma chère collègue, la sénatrice Chantal Petitclerc, à partager les conclusions de notre étude, mais cette fois-ci en français.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, sénatrice Simons, et bonjour et bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Quel plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui pour enfin vous présenter ce rapport critique et important sur la santé des sols. Je veux commencer comme on le fait, comme sénatrice Simons le fait, par remercier le travail et la passion extraordinaire de notre président, sénateur Black. 4 ans de travail, 4 ans de passion. Et c'est vrai qu'au départ, on n'était pas tous aussi passionnés que vous, mais on a tous embarqué dans ce projet-là. Et aujourd'hui, je suis très, très fière d'avoir fait partie de cette équipe-là. Et merci à tout le monde. Je vous répète, Monsieur le Président, et cette fois en français, le sol est essentiel à toute vie. Mais on le sait, on l'a appris, les sols au Canada se sont érodés au fil des décennies, créant ainsi un problème majeur pour notre santé économique, environnementale, humaine ou sociale. Parce qu'il faut le savoir, quand on parle de la santé des sols, on parle de toute la santé globale. Et ça, c'est important. Comme le suggère le titre de notre rapport, nous nous trouvons aujourd'hui sur un terrain critique. Et c'est pourquoi notre comité exhorte le gouvernement fédéral à considérer nos sols comme une ressource naturelle précieuse. Je voudrais également souligner quelques autres recommandations que vous allez trouver dans notre rapport. Premièrement, c'est impératif de trouver des moyens d'inciter nos agriculteurs à adopter des pratiques de gestion régénératrice des sols, telles que, bien sûr, comme exemple, l'agroforesterie et les méthodes sans labour. On doit aussi, et c'est essentiel, récompenser les pionniers. On les a entendus, ceux qui ont été là avant tout le monde, ceux qui ont été les premiers à intégrer une culture régénératrice. Et c'est pourquoi notre comité demande l'instauration de crédits d'impôt pour encourager l'adoption d'innovations et de technologies qui vont soutenir la santé des sols. Nous demandons également au gouvernement fédéral de créer un modèle d'assurance récolte pour favoriser la mise en œuvre de pratiques régénératrices. Deuxièmement, notre comité a entendu qu'il n'y avait pas suffisamment de financement pour la recherche et le partage de données. Dans ma province d'origine, le Québec, par exemple, la recherche dans le secteur des légumes, on le sait, est sous-financée. Et ce, malgré le fait que les ventes annuelles de légumes ont atteint 500 millions de dollars en 2020, donc presque autant que les ventes de sirop d'érable. Le gouvernement fédéral doit augmenter ce financement offert aux partenariats public-privé pour la recherche sur les sols agricoles et forestiers. On doit également fournir un financement à long terme pour l'agrégation des données sur les sols, et ce, dans tout le pays. Et finalement, et c'est important, et on en a parlé beaucoup, l'éducation est cruciale pour changer la perception actuelle de l'agriculture au Canada. Soyons clairs, le problème n'est pas qu'il existe une perception négative de l'industrie agricole, pas du tout. Mais le défi, c'est que le secteur est trop peu connu encore. L'éducation doit commencer dans les salles de classe de nos écoles primaires et secondaires. Notre comité a entendu des organismes comme Agriculture en classe Canada qui visent à faire connaître l'agriculture aux jeunes élèves. Ces programmes enseignent, éduquent, montrent aux élèves l'importance du rôle des agriculteurs, de nos éleveurs, de nos producteurs dans la production alimentaire au Canada et ainsi que la nécessité de préserver la santé de nos sols. De plus, notre comité a entendu qu'il y a eu un déclin inquiétant de l'enseignement des sciences du sol au Canada et qu'il y a des obstacles liés à l'éducation agricole pour les peuples autochtones. On demande donc au gouvernement fédéral de financer des programmes agricoles dans les écoles primaires et secondaires et d'améliorer le financement à long terme des programmes d'études sur les sols dans les établissements d'enseignement post-secondaire. En conclusion, notre comité croit fermement qu'il est essentiel d'adopter une nouvelle approche pour mieux promouvoir, financer et encourager la santé des sols. Il s'agit d'un projet d'une entreprise vaste et complexe qui va nécessiter la collaboration de tous les niveaux de gouvernement et des communautés autochtones, bien sûr. Car une chose est certaine pour nous tous, quand on place en priorité, quand on place au premier plan la santé des sols, eh bien, tout le monde y gagne. Merci, Miigwech. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Et j'ai le plaisir, j'ai le grand plaisir de vous inviter, on a hâte de vous entendre, de vous inviter, M. Kruszel, à prendre la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Sénatrice Petitclerc. Honorable Senators, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press, what an honor it is for me to be here with you today on the auspicious occasion of the release of this incredible document. Right? What a title. Critical Ground, Why Soil is Essential to Canada's Economic, Environmental, Human, and Social Health. How incredibly apt. Folks, my name is Alan Kruszel. I'm a longtime board member of the Soil Conservation Council of Canada and a no-till crop farmer from Eastern Ontario. Ladies and gentlemen, I earn my living from the soil, and I strive each and every day to learn how to take better care of my soil so I can pass it on to my children in better condition than I received it. Je voudrais remercier le comité, leur personnel et tous les témoins pour tout le temps consacré à l'élaboration de cette excellente étude. Un merci spécial au sénateur Rob Black pour avoir attiré l'attention du comité sur la question des sols et les persuader de faire cette étude, puis avoir travaillé sans relâche jusqu'à qu'elle soit complétée, cette étude. Mesdames et messieurs, vous vous demandez peut-être pourquoi nous passons autant de temps à parler du sol. La réponse, mes amis, est assez simple. C'est parce que le sol est la fondation de la vie sur notre terre. Saviez-vous qu'une cuillère de thé de sol sain contient plus de micro-organismes qu'il y a personne vivant sur la planète Terre? Saviez-vous également que 95% de la nourriture que nous mangeons provient du sol? Comment l'a déclaré le professeur Gauchal au comité en février dernier? Il faut près de 1000 ans pour générer un seul centimètre de sol de surface de bonne qualité. En bref, notre survie dépend énormément de la santé de nos sols. This study does an excellent job at highlighting the many issues facing our soils. And I fully believe that if the Government of Canada follows through on the recommendations contained within this study, it would be an absolute quantum leap forward in helping to improve and sustain Canadian soils. We must, of course, not expect all of these changes to occur all at once. Some of the recommendations contained within this report will require an enormous amount of discussion or maybe research. These things can take years to happen. Other of these recommendations may be able to be implemented a little bit quicker, such as a national soils advocate. I think that could happen fairly quickly. Of particular interest to me is the recommendation on supporting the development of a long-term, overarching strategy to to protect and conserve soils. I am delighted to report that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has already started some work on this recommendation by providing funds to our Soil Conservation Council of Canada, who are right now in the early stages of developing such a strategy. I would also like to acknowledge the generous support of the Greenbelt Foundation and CropLife Canada, who have also provided some funds for that strategy's development. It is my hope that this Canadian agri-food industry-led strategy will be the go-to document in helping to prioritize actions to help improve soil health across our country. It is so fitting that the committee's study is released 40 years to the month of the last Senate study that Senator Black referred to. Senator Sparrow's study was a groundbreaking study, and I believe yours is just as well. I have a copy of my last study with me here. It was also signed by Senator Sparrow, and I'm really hoping to get some time to see Senator Black and get his signature on this new one before I leave here today. Thank you so very much for the invitation to be here, and thanks for this great study that I'm sure will be just as impactful as the last one was. Thank you for your work.
Okay, thank you so much to our participants for being here and for your opening comments this morning. We will move now to the question and answer period of this morning's event. We'll start with questions in the room, and then we will go online to Zoom for more questions. Reminder to our journalists participating today, it's one question and one follow-up. We'll start in the room with Alex Binkley.
Yes, thank you. Senator Black, I'm just wondering, you cover, pardon the saying, cover a lot of ground in this. But do you have some idea of sort of a sensible order the government could respond in terms of taking action on recommendations?
The moving forward on a strategy is number one, and the identification of a soil advocate would be relatively easy to undertake with the right individual, and it would put the strategy and the issue in perspective, from my perspective.
And from there, then,
there's a number at the. They're not in any particular order, but the earlier ones I would suggest are ones that can be should be accomplished in a sort of a progressive order.
okay.
Do you have a follow-up, Alex?
No, that's fine. Great.
In that case, we'll go to the Zoom platform. A reminder to our participants online, if you do have a question for any of our participants here this morning, to please use the raise hand function. Donc, pour les participants sur la plateforme Zoom, n'oubliez pas de l'utiliser la fonction lever la main. Looks like we have our first question. We will go to Karen Briere with the Western Producer. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I'm wondering about the recommendation to designate soil a strategic resource. What would that do?
I can take a stab, and others can join in. Thanks very much for that question, Karen. From my perspective, it sets the stage for that, for government and everyone else, all orders of government, to recognize that soil is a strategic resource, as simple as that, and then allows potentially other work to take place following that. Senator Simons?
I suppose it does two things. I mean, one is symbolic, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the symbolic announcement, just as I began my remarks with a land acknowledgement. I mean, I think declaring it a national strategic resource will raise the profile of soil so that people don't just say, oh, it's dirt, why should we care? I don't know that a lot of people know, I mean, I'm sure you do because you work for the Western Producer, that only about between 6 and 7% of Canada is actually land suitable for agriculture. And so I think to raise awareness of just how rare and precious a resource soil is would be the first step. But I think it also has potential public policy implications, because it would suggest that when provinces and municipalities are doing land use planning, when the federal government is doing land use planning on its own crown land, that we consider the importance of soil just as we consider the importance of water and air pollution, that we pay attention to the health of the soil and to the pollution of the soil.
Senator Petitclerc.
I agree with what has been said, and I will just add that one of the things that we noticed and that we were told during this study is that when we are having this conversation on climate change and environment, very often we will talk about the air, the water, and the pollution, and the soil has seemed to be a bit of the forgotten one. And so one of the importance of these recommendation is to bring back soil to where it should be as a priority.
I liken it to a three-legged stool, and the soil has been the short leg for many, many years.
And Karen, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I was also curious, you didn't mention it in your opening remarks, but the report notes the reinstatement of PFRA, and I was wondering where that recommendation came from and why that would be important.
Thank you, Karen, for that. We heard that when we were traveling in the West, and from a number of our witnesses throughout the testimony. We heard from 153 witnesses, and that issue did come up on a number of occasions. In particular, certainly from witnesses from the West.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that I mentioned only 6 to 7% of Canada is suitable for agriculture. Of that agricultural land, 75% is in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So Alberta, Saskatchewan, and southern Manitoba are so critically important to Canada's agricultural economy and critically important to climate mitigation, because the tending of those grasslands, to look after them, to make sure that we are sequestering carbon in the most efficient and effective way, a focus on the prairies is, I think, essential.
Do we have any other participants on the Zoom platform? It looks like Diana Martin with Glacier Farm Media. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I noted that a lot of the recommendations revolve around enhanced funding, whether it's peer-to-peer soil networks or funding for soil mapping. How important, and I also noticed in the report, a lot of the information is basically 8 years old. 2016 is where the information for soil erosion, et cetera, is limited to. How critical is having this information when it comes to informing these potential incentives, programs, and informing policies, even to set a baseline?
Thanks, Diana, for joining us today. It is critical, very critical, to have up-to-date information, and as you've noted, some of it is very out of date. In fact, some soil maps date back to the 30s and 40s. And while soil profiles don't change a lot, there is changes, certainly. So funding for activities around soil mapping and various other things to gather that baseline data is so very important. We don't have that baseline that we could have gone back to with this report. That was one of the first questions. Yeah. Let's see the baseline report and information, and we don't have that across Canada. So funding is critical, and it will, in my mind, make or break this the work of this report.
You know, the irony is that we've never had better soil mapping technology. We've never had better techniques, whether that's using drones or whether that's the kind of soil coring we can do now. And I'm hopeful that this doesn't necessarily just mean government funding, because I think what the witnesses told us again and again is if you have the right soil mapping, you can make things much more economically efficient for farmers. There's less waste of fertilizer being put in places that don't need it or where it's not going to help anyway. And you can have better seeding information because you know where the land is going to be most fertile. And so soil mapping can be essential for that, but it goes beyond that. One of our witnesses, Stuart Chutter, who spoke to us, he is himself a farmer and rancher from Saskatchewan, but he works for Alberta's farm insurance program. He's done a lot of work that showed that where soil is richer in organic carbon, insurance payouts go down. So he drew a direct correlation between enriching the soil with organic carbon matter and the requirement to pay out, whether that's for drought or flood or other, environmental disaster. So if you can convince people that soil mapping isn't just some idea that a bunch of people from Ottawa in suits came up with, but something that is of practical advantage to farmers on the ground and to provincial insurance companies, we can maybe build a critical mass of passion to get our soil mapping up to date, not because a bunch of politicians and bureaucrats thought it was a good idea, but because it's actually going to put money back in farmers' pockets. And I don't know if you want to
Well,
speak
maybe
to that
just,
too.
if I may, following up on that, you're talking about lower payouts from crop insurance on richer soils or higher organic matter soils. That could easily translate into lower premiums for the producers as well if they are at less risk, right? So I think that's an excellent thing, and certainly support investments in soil mapping, no question.
And Diana, did you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you so much. We're 40 years ahead, gone from the previous study. I'm honestly there have been some advances, but what kind of measurement have you put in place for critical ground to say, all right, where are we 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, to ensure that actual change happens? It's great to do a study, but unless there's follow through, unless there's benchmarks to meet, often it just kind of slides off the side of the plate.
Thanks very much, Diana. Lots has happened in the 40 years since Soil at Risk, Canada's Eroding Future, and the 25 recommendations in our Critical Ground report certainly, I think, is the start to those measurements. We will be asking the government to respond to this report and tell us how they intend to deal with move forward with the 25 recommendations. But that being said, I think this report should, and I do hope it resonates with all Canadians and with all orders of government, federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal, because all orders of government are involved in the issue of healthy soil. And so you can expect, I think, that this committee will watch it closely and track it going forward, both with respect to the response from government within 185 days and beyond that, as we look to some of the recommendations that speak to annual reports, annual summits, and things like that.
The challenge of being a Senate committee is that we are not the boss of anybody. What we want to do, though, is not just make this a call to action for the federal government. And in a federated country where provinces are responsible, have shared jurisdiction for agriculture and almost exclusive jurisdiction for land use planning, it's a sort of a subtle call to action to the provinces too, although that's not not the field that we plow. But I think this is, sorry, it's inevitable. I really hope that this report, which I'm now going to waggle for the camera, is a call to action for Canadians. If you want the government to be held accountable, that's going to be as much up to the public and the media to help us to do that. What we want to do is have a little bit of an earthquake, a paradigm shift, where we get people to say, our soil matters. I mean, we heard that 25% of the world's animal life is in the soil. And without that animal life, soil isn't soil, it's dirt and it's dead. We need a national conversation about soil. And if we can help to provoke that, that's really, I think, as much as what we want to do as to tell the government want to do. We want to tell the people of Canada, this is a resource that matters to you. It doesn't just matter to farmers. It doesn't just matter to ranchers and foresters. It matters to Canadians who care about not just our future economy, but our future environmental and physical health.
Merci, Chair. Just to reinforce that, to me, this report, it's coming from the Senate committee, but really it's coming from over 150 testimony experts. It's database, it's science-based. So we will do our job, us and the ones after us, to push for these recommendations to come into action and into life. But my hope is that this will be used as the powerful tool that it is for provinces, for organizations, for stakeholders. I think it's everyone's business to make sure that those recommendations come into life. So we will play our part, and I trust that every stakeholder will use this report, this study, and play their part as well.
It's a collaborative nature, and with the Canadian Soil or Conservation Council of Canada and others. Alan.
Yeah, just if I may, I think the purpose of this report is also just to raise awareness and get the ball rolling, right? Recommendation number 4 talks about Government of Canada collaborating with the provinces and territories to support the development of consensus on how to measure, report, and verify soil health, right? As of today, we don't have that. We don't know 100% sure what the status of our soils are across the country. That's a travesty. We have to fix that, right? This recommendation is going a long way to getting us there, right? First, we have to figure out what are we going to measure, right? There is not consensus in the scientific community or the farm community of what parameters should we be looking at. What is a good number even of those parameters, right? We have to start those discussions, then we can get consensus and start that monitoring process to make sure that we are making progress and advancing soil health in this country.
Chloe Saint-Ange, Journal Agricole. Did you have a question online?
I don't have a question, thank you.
Okay. And the only other participant I see on the Zoom platform is Lilianne Morris with Glacier Farm Media. Did you want to ask a question of our participants? I'm not sure if Lilianne is there. Lilianne, can you hear us? Okay, I don't see any other questions either in the room or online. So unless senators, you have any closing remarks?
I just want to add one thing because it picks up where Alan left off. There are tremendous amounts of important soil research being done all across the country. But it's very much, if you'll pardon another farm metaphor, in silos. So, I mean, one of the shocking things we learned is that there's almost no coordination of, there's no central data point where people can share that data. And we heard again and again from witnesses that pooling that data would be immensely powerful, because you would not just know what's going on at UBC, what's going on at UNB, what's going on at Dalhousie, what's going on at Guelph, what's going on at Olds. Farmers themselves would have access to that information, and we would be able to see where we're at. And I think the other thing that is really important, and I cannot stress this enough, is how different the soil is from place to place. And a solution like winter cropping or cover cropping that works beautifully in Guelph does not work in Peace River. So we need to find techniques that are tailored for where they are happening. And I think finally, one of the really disturbing things that we learned in our report is the state of our permafrost in northern Canada. And I would invite people to look at the section in the report on permafrost melt if they would like to be up late at night. But I'm so proud of the work that we did in pulling together all of that information. And I want to single out our analyst, Joanne Markel-Damontaine, who actually wrote the report. I mean, it was hard for me as 30-year career as a journalist, not to try to write the report myself, but Joanne did just a brilliant job, and I'm so proud of all the work that this committee has done under the leadership of Senator Black.
Thank you, Senator Simons. I will end by saying that we had 153 witnesses over the course of our testimony, 36 meetings, almost 60 hours of testimony, and outside of that, on top of that, 74 briefs from individuals, organizations, and academic institutions. We traveled across the province, across the country, and around the world to look at the details around soil health in Canada and find out what's happening elsewhere that we can bring back. It's been my pleasure to deal with the folks here this morning and the committee members that are here today and our committee. And again, I do want to thank our analyst, our clerk, and all those staff members behind the scenes that do so much to make sure that we can prepare and present a report like this. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
And thank you to CPAC for coordinating this today.
Thank you so much to our participants. This concludes the press conference. Well, have a great day, everyone.